Thank you for joining this session on exploring diverse methods to integrate Dataverse with Microsoft Fabric. Now, before we proceed, a little bit about myself. I am Nandan Hegde. I work as a data architect at Accenture. I am a 2 times Microsoft Data Platform MVP, a Microsoft Fabric super user, and a Microsoft Data Community Champion. I enjoy writing blogs, and you all can reach out to me via my Twitter ID or via my LinkedIn profile. Now, enough about myself, and let's move on to the core crux of this invite. Now, before we move ahead with integration of Microsoft Fabric and Dataverse, let's understand what exactly are those. Now, Microsoft Fabric is a software as a service tool that Microsoft released a couple of 1 or 2 years back. And it's an end-to-end analytics and data platform designed for enterprises that requires a unified solution. And it's a one common software as a service that covers everything from data movement to data engineering, data science, real-time intelligence, and data analytics, that is Power BI. Now, what is Dataverse? So one can consider Dataverse as the database of the Power Platform ecosystem of Microsoft. So in the exact technical terminology, Microsoft Dataverse is a data storage and management engine which serves as a major foundation for Microsoft Power Platform, Office 365 and Dynamic 365 apps. Now, Dataverse also is a Microsoft ecosystem and Microsoft Fabric is also a Microsoft ecosystem, but both are silos. In today's world, it's very critical that there is a central source of truth as much as possible, and there is a unity amongst all data analytical aspect. Since Microsoft Fabric in itself has its own storage layer and Dataverse itself is Microsoft's Power Platform storage layer, how can we integrate those two? That's the crux of this today's agenda. Now, Microsoft Fabric has a major concept called one lake. Now, what do you mean by one lake? Now, one lake can be considered as a logical storage of data that provides one-way access to all of the data within your fabric across your entire tenant. So it includes the entire data that is present within your tenant and within fabric. So one can consider the one lake as the parent data lake within Microsoft's Fabric ecosystem. So similar to how we have projects within Azure DevOps or resource groups within Azure platform, similarly, we have something called as workspaces within Microsoft Fabric that acts as a logical layer or logical segregation aspect between different projects or initiatives. Now, every workspace might have its own set of data. Now, the cumulative of all the data across all the workspaces is present within one concept of one lake that acts as a logical storage within Microsoft ecosystem. So this is the physical data that is present actually within the Fabric ecosystem across your tenant. Now, there can be scenarios within an organization wherein some of the organization data is present in external systems. Like let's consider that an organization is hiring a third-party vendor to be its recruiter. In that case, the recruitment team might have their own ecosystem wherein they might be hosting their data. So, One Lake is an advanced version of the data lake that Microsoft has created, along with the ability to communicate across external sources like Amazon S3 bucket, Google GCP storage layer, or within Microsoft ecosystem Dataverse and ADLS, without physically syncing the data back or physically replicating the data back into the One Lake ecosystem. And that terminology of data virtualization, wherein one can still refer the data within Microsoft Fabric ecosystem from external sources without actually syncing that or physically replicating that data into the Fabric ecosystem is what Microsoft terms as shortcut. That's an advanced version of data virtualization, which is imbibed in Microsoft Data Lake called shortcuts. Now, why did I explain this terminology? Because it's based on this functionality that the further aspects that we would be seeing with respect to integration mechanism between Fabric and Dataverse would rely on. So in layman terminology, shortcut is a functionality provided by Microsoft Fabric within its ecosystem or the data lake, wherein one can virtually point to the data that is physically present across external sources, read the data without the need of physically replicating the data into one space. So it's like a virtual pointer or a reference. So even if you delete the shortcut, the data is still physically present in the source location. Sorry for that. Now, there are different ways to integrate the data between a Dataverse and a Fabric. The four major mechanisms are: one can create a link to Microsoft Fabric from Dataverse. Leveraging that, the second mechanism is to create a shortcut, wherein the first two mechanisms are more towards the shortcut concept, wherein it's more on the data virtualization aspect. The third and fourth, the data pipeline and the data flow Gen 2, are more towards physically moving the data from Dataverse ecosystem into Fabric ecosystem and integrating that data. So there are some prerequisites that are needed to actually do this integration. The first aspect is have a Fabric capacity. Now, in order for my jobs to work across, one needs a CPU or a capacity. That's what is termed as Fabric capacity. Now, the major necessity is the Fabric capacity should be in the same geographical region as the Dataverse. Couple of months back, it was a region to region necessity, location to location necessity, but now it has been made at a geographical region. What do I mean by that? Let's say that my Dataverse is in Southeast Asia, but my Fabric capacity might be in Southwest Asia. Earlier, even the location necessity was needed, hence it was needed to be exact replica. But now Southeast Asia and Southwest Asia are within the same geographical region. It can work. That restriction has been removed. But one cannot have a Fabric capacity in US with Dataverse being in Southeast Asia, because those are different geographical regions. The second aspect is ability to create Fabric items. Now, what does this mean? Basically, Microsoft Fabric is an evolving aspect. Similar to how we have a Power Platform Admin Center, similarly, there is a Fabric Admin Portal. Within Fabric Admin Portal, one can allow only certain users within an organization to create Fabric item, because Fabric is an always ever evolving tool wherein Microsoft is releasing new features and functionalities day in, day out. In case if I enable all the property, by default, everyone might exploit those properties without proper security clearance within the organization. Hence, there is a property within the Fabric admin portal allowing users within that organization to create ability to create Fabric item. Now that needs to be enabled because we want to integrate something within the Fabric. Third is I need to have a system administrator security role within the Dataverse. And fourth is I need to have admin in the Fabric workspace wherein I want to synchronize the data. So I need to be admin within the Dataverse, admin within the Fabric workspace, wherein I act as the common bridge between them. Now, enough theoretical, and let's move to the practical aspect. Now, as I said, we want to integrate Dataverse with Microsoft Fabric. So for that, let me go to the Dataverse aspect. That is within make.powerapps.com, I can go to the table section, which is the Dataverse. Now, the Dataverse contains multiple entities, correct? So with respect, so with respect to that, and now what I can do is, first step is within the tables, I have something called as, within the Dataverse aspect, I have something called as link to Microsoft Fabric. So the first step for me is link to Microsoft Fabric. Now, as I said, I need to have admin access within the Dataverse and admin access within the workspace. I have access to the Dataverse, but now let me go and create a workspace. The sync or the destination wherein I need to synchronize that. So for that, let me create a workspace called Dataverse underscore Delhi Tech Community. Since I am creating the workspace, I am the admin myself. Now, the second requirement, I have already fulfilled two requirements. That is admin on the workspace, admin on the Dataverse. The next aspect is have a capacity. Now, there are two types of Fabric capacity that I can create. One is a Fabric trial capacity or a Fabric dedicated capacity. For this demo, I'll proceed with the Fabric trial capacity. So let me apply. Now, in case if I go to workspace settings, under license information, I can see that my Fabric trial capacity is under Southeast Asia. Now, I have fulfilled 4 requirements. How? Because if you see, this is the environment, Nandan Hegde. Under, in case if I want to check the region and other aspects, I have to go to the admin center. So how to go to the admin center? Click on the settings within make.powerapps.com and go to the admin center. Now within Power Platform Admin Center, there's something called as environments. So I'll go to the environments and click on the environment I want to link the Microsoft Fabric to. Here is the region Asia, and my Fabric trial capacity is in Southeast Asia, the same geographical region, thereby allowing me to proceed with the changes. So as of now, I have fulfilled all 4 prerequisites. So now let's proceed with establishing something called as Microsoft link to Microsoft Fabric. So first is I'll click on link to Microsoft Fabric. What this does is it first checks the account via which I have logged into the Dataverse, whether it has any access to the Power BI and the Fabric capacity corresponding to that region or not. If I have access, then it would enable it and go to the connection to the Dataverse environment wherein I want to establish the connection to. Now, what is this environment domain? Or from where do I get this environment domain? Environment domain is nothing but the environment URL of which I want to synchronize to the Microsoft Fabric. So it's org03, which is equivalent to Nandan Hegde's environment. So now I'll save this connection. Post that, I'll proceed to the next aspect. Now what this is doing is, it is checking whether within the Fabric ecosystem, am I having the necessary workspace that is connected to that particular geographical region or not. I am having these many workspaces equivalent to the Southeast or the Asia geographical region. For now, since I've created the Dataverse Delhi Tech Community, I'll proceed with that. Now, what this does is, once I click on create, the workspace is created. What Microsoft Fabric does is it goes and creates a lakehouse. Now, what is a lakehouse? As I said, one lake can be considered as a logical storage layer. Lakehouse is the child data lake equivalent within the Microsoft Fabric. Now, what is data lake? Data, okay. Earlier, couple of years back, there was a concept called data. There is a concept still called data warehousing, wherein data warehousing is basically storage of structured data. But in today's world, just having structured data is not enough. You also have to analyze semi-structured and unstructured data. So in that case, data warehouses cannot suffice. So you have a concept called data lake. So data lake is a data terminology wherein one can preserve structured, semi-structured and unstructured data. So lakehouse can be considered as a data lake equivalent in the Microsoft Fabric. And OneLake is the parent data lake of the entire tenant, whereas lakehouse are child data lakes within the necessary workspaces. So it would go and automatically create a lakehouse. Then post lakehouse creation, it would create shortcuts to the OneLake from that lakehouse. So let me create it. So what it is doing is it's creating a connection to that workspace and creating the lakehouse. Post that, creating the shortcuts. This might take time because as of now, what the Dataverse is doing is for all the entities within the Dataverse, it's trying to replicate that data from the Dataverse into another layer within the Dataverse and then creating shortcuts to the corresponding Power BI workspace or the Fabric workspace. So it does take certain amount of time. If you see, it created and it took over, it created the necessary aspect and popped up an aspect within my Dataverse Delhi Tech Community workspace. And you all can see that it automatically created a lakehouse with the naming convention Dataverse underscore my environment name underscore common data service, which is equal another name for Dataverse underscore a unique UID value. Now I can go under settings and change the Dataverse, the lakehouse name as well, but that's for other time. Now let me go within this lakehouse. Within this lakehouse, you can see that under tables, I am seeing something called as unidentified 99 plus. What does that mean? Correct. Basically, what happens is back to the slides. When we create something called as a Synapse Fabric link, as I said, it's creating a shortcut. So the data is virtually being referred in the Fabric via something called a shortcut, but still the data is present within the Dataverse ecosystem. But in order for Fabric to create shortcut, it expects the data in the source to be in the Delta Parquet format. Now, for some of you all, the concept of Delta Parquet might be something new. So I'll break it up. You all might have heard files formats like Excel and CSV. These are what we call as row level files, row files. Now Parquet is a columnar file format. What I mean by that, let's assume that I have the data of employee and the salary information within an organization as row by row. Now, in case if I want to say, if I ask what is the overall expense that the organization is bearing for all the employees, I need to take a sum of all the salary. But in case of row files, what we have to do is we have to scan across every row, every column, and then take a sum. This is unnecessarily increased in the performance time. Hence, in case of analytical aspect, it is better to have the data in the transposed format, meaning rows getting converted as columns. So that rather than parsing every row, if the column gets parsed as a row, I can directly parse the row to get the salary sum. So Parquet file format are columnar file format. And the other major aspect is compression. Parquet file format provide a very heavy data compression aspect, allowing organization to preserve the data in a very compressed format. This is with respect to Parquet file format. What about Delta? Delta is an advanced version of Parquet file with a transaction log enabled, a log file associated. Now to those from the data engineering background or the SQL database background, you all might have heard about something called as MDF file and LDF file, main database file and log database file. So one can consider MDS file as the Parquet file and the LDF file as the Delta file, wherein the main database file contains the original data, Parquet file contains the original data, and the log database file contains the database transaction like insert, update, delete, and the Delta file contains the transaction within Microsoft Fabric with respect to any changes that have been made within that data. So what happens when we are creating the link is Dataverse is creating a replica of that data that is present in the form of tables in the form of Delta Parquet file. So Dynamics C365 or the Dataverse is synchronizing those set of changes in a Delta Parquet, but everything is being done within the Dataverse ecosystem itself. And then post the synchronization, the Fabric Lakehouse is creating shortcuts within the Dataverse to this intermittent layer to read the Dataverse data. So in short, the Fabric link creates a Delta and Parquet file in the Dataverse storage to sync the data and the changes to, and it creates a read-only replica of this data. However, this data still remains within the Dataverse storage itself. Fabric link is not actually synchronizing or syncing any data from the Dataverse into the Fabric one lake. Post that, it creates a lakehouse in the Fabric that we saw and creates shortcuts into the table section to all the sources within the Dataverse. So now let's go and check. We saw, correct? Within the Dataverse, it's still unidentified because what is happening is Dataverse is still synchronizing a read-only replica within its ecosystem, because of which it is taking time, and usually it takes, depending on the amount of data, it takes around 1 to 2 hours for it to be fully synchronized. So this was the process. Now let me go to one of the lake house wherein I had all, you all saw at the beginning, correct? I had two environments. One is YLDF7 and another is with respect to Nandan Hegde. So for the YLDF7, if you all see, I have already created a synchron Fabric link. So let me go and click here. You all can see that. Let me zoom in a little. You all can see that there is a symbol here at the tables. This bracket like symbol. This indicates that this is a shortcut within the lakehouse. It's not a physical data within the lakehouse, but a shortcut referencing to something else. Now, when I clicked on this table, I'm able to see the account data. Now let me go and check the view files properties. Here you would see there is a delta log file and then there is a Parquet file that hosts the data. But does that mean these files are physically present within the Microsoft Fabric layer? No, these are pointing to the Delta and Parquet file that are present within the Dataverse storage layer, which is a read-only replica. So in this way, the systems, that is the Power Platform, Dataverse, and the Microsoft Fabrics, which were in silos, are now integrated within Microsoft Fabric. And the data is though physically present within the Dataverse itself, we are still able to virtually reference it within Microsoft Fabric for my analytical purposes, analytical or any other purposes, be it machine learning, analysis, etc. But there are a couple of drawbacks with this method. Unfortunately, Dataverse is already a costly affair. On top of that, if I'm duplicating the data, because this is creating a read-only replica, the Dataverse storage layer increases, thereby increasing the cost. But this aspect is being internally being managed by Microsoft. We are not making any aspects within this. So now that's one of the drawback, correct? In case if it is a Dataverse, it's a costly affair. It's increasing the storage layer within the Dataverse. Second aspect is I'm not getting the ability to select only particular entities. It's synchronizing all the entities, thereby taking this much amount of time. So this is the second drawback. Other than that, the data is still present within the Dataverse. Any changes happening within the Dataverse would synchronize here. But is it instant synchronization? Now let's assume that one time sync was done. Now any change in account, would it instantly get synced here? The answer is no. Because Microsoft has to internally sync from the main C365 system into the read-only replica. So Microsoft internally has a hourly schedule of this synchronization. We cannot control that synchronization time, meaning in case if you want a 15-minute or an hourly synchronization, unfortunately, that's not under our control. So these are the three drawbacks, but the benefit is I am able to see the data within the Dataverse by a matter of just few clicks without having to write any complex ETL process or any other jobs. Pretty simple for anyone to do that. Now, this is with respect to synchronizing all the data. Now, let me go to my another workspace. And now let me create a lakehouse myself. So let me write it as Dataverse underscore lakehouse. Now this is an empty lakehouse that I created. Now Microsoft provides a functionality called shortcut directly to Dataverse. So I can select the Dataverse. I can create a connection, meaning I need to establish a connection to my destination, correct? So that I have to provide an environment domain URL and have to authenticate it. Since I already have an existing connection with my environment, that is Nandan Hegde org03, I'll proceed. Now, here, this gives me the flexibility to select only specific entities that I want to create shortcut to, rather than all the entities that are present within my ecosystem. Correct? Now, the problem here is, if you see, I'm just able to see only specific tables, not all the entities within the Dataverse. Even though I am the system administrator within that Dataverse. Correct? I'll discuss, let's get back to this point 1 or 2 minutes later. Correct? But this gives me the flexibility to select only specific entities that I want to synchronize. So let's proceed. I can even edit the table names. So okay, let me edit this one from underscore part. I'll remove the underscore partition tag. And I can create. So now, if you see this, it is creating shortcut from Dataverse to this lakehouse. And it will take some time to synchronize. Now, unfortunately, why was I able to only see specific entities, not all entities? Because one of the prerequisite of creating a shortcut directly to the Dataverse is to first have a fabric link established. Once the fabric link is established, then Microsoft would create the synchronization layer. And when we are trying to create this shortcut directly to the Dataverse, what it is doing is it is basically referencing this zone, not this zone. And since this zone is still into synchronization mode, not all entities have been synchronized. Under my dropdown, I was not able to see all the entities because it's still synchronizing. But now, in case if I want to create shortcut to my other Dataverse environment, which is org9, wherein everything was synchronized, I'll be able to see all the entities because those are already synchronized into the synchronization zone. So isn't this confusing that when I already have a fabric link established, then what is the need of this creating this shortcut? Why can't I directly use this lakehouse itself? Now imagine that the problem is Dataverse is a complex as database, correct? It contains everything from data to the RLS. Now, once we create a fabric link, the RLS does not get reciprocated. It is just the data that is visible here. So anyone having access on this lake house would be able to see the entire data. Whereas in case of this synchronization aspect, he or she would have RLS. Since it's still within the Dataverse zone itself, the RLS applicable within this Dataverse would be applicable for him or her. So rather than I having to manually reciprocate the RLS within this lake house, creating this shortcut would automatically take care of that. So in that way, even though the necessity is to have a fabric link, one can have a dedicated entity shortcut created via this aspect, managing the security. So this is the second aspect of integrating Dataverse with Microsoft Fabric. Now, up till now, we saw that in these two aspects, the data is being virtualized in Fabric and it being physically present within the Dataverse itself. But in both the cases, I need to have a additional read-only replica within the Dataverse. And Dataverse is a costly affair and you would be charged. Now imagine if there is a need for the downstream just to have two entities synchronized from Dataverse into Fabric link. Sorry, into Fabric. Would having a Fabric link suffice? Yes. But is that a right approach? No, because it is a very costly affair because you are synchronizing all the tables from your Dataverse table into a read-only replica. In case if there would have been only some tables, then this would have been, if you could have the ability to select particular tables, then that would have been a very good aspect. But unfortunately, it's synchronizing all the changes. So in such cases, there are two methods wherein you can physically replicate the data from Dataverse into Microsoft Fabric. Here, you are duplicating the data from Dataverse into Microsoft Fabric. So for that, the two tools that Microsoft Fabric provides is data pipeline. So let me create a data pipeline. Now, since I have to physically copy, meaning I have to copy. So there's an activity called copy activity. So let me add it to this canvas. Now I have to connect to my source, correct, from where I want to copy that data. So that would be my Dataverse. Since I have already had an active connection created, I'll leverage that. The connection type would be Dataverse. And I can select which entity I want to copy to. Since I have multiple entities, it takes time to load. Let's wait for a couple of minutes. Now, either I can have it hard coded or I can parameterize it, meaning I can make it a metadata driven framework wherein just passing certain names, the job would automatically take care of synchronizing all those entities from Dataverse into Fabric rather than hard coded in this scenario. I can add a dynamic content, but for in this scenario, let me hard code it to an account entity. So my source is account entity. Destination I want to copy into my lake house. Correct. So let me select the lake house. Within Microsoft Fabric. It does take time. So let's wait. So within my one lake, I have a lake house called Dataverse underscore lake house. Let me select that. Do I want to create a new table? Yes, I want to create a new table. And that new table would be account underscore Dataverse. Let me create it and let me execute this job. For that, I'll click on save and run. So what this is doing is it's physically copying the data as is from Dataverse into the Microsoft Fabric Lakehouse. So in this scenario, In case of Microsoft Fabric link, even if I'm hitting this multiple times, it's a read-only replica. So there won't be any impact on your Dynamic 365 system because it's still leveraging the original Dataverse and we are leveraging the synchronization aspect. So there are no performance issues. But in this case, I'm actually referencing the Dynamic C365 entity. So in case if someone is trying to write and at the same time I'm trying to synchronize this data, there might be some performance issues depending on how much amount of data and other aspects. So let me go and check in the lakehouse. This was our lakehouse, correct? Let me refresh this. Can you see? There is a table called account underscore Dataverse. And let me zoom in a little. Unlike ADX underscore invitation, wherein you have a bracket symbol at the top, account underscore Dataverse does not have. Because this is a physical table within the Dataverse, within the Fabric itself. Whereas this is a shortcut in Fabric hosting, referencing the data that is present in the Dataverse. So in this case, I was able to physically replicate the data from Dataverse into the Microsoft Fabric. And this might have impact on your Dynamic 365 ecosystem, but it's a minor impact. But this provides a flexibility wherein you can govern the schedule at which you want to synchronize rather than hourly one that Microsoft governs. Here, you can synchronize or control the synchronization time in which you want. And you can select the specific entities that you want to synchronize, thereby saving the storage cost within the Dataverse and governing the schedule. But at what cost? You're duplicating the data and you are hitting the Dynamic 365, which might lead to performance issues. But it's okay in case if there are one or two entities involved. So this is with respect to when you want to move the data as is between Dataverse and Microsoft Fabric. But what about in case if you have to do some transformations of the data before moving it into Fabric? So for that, you have something called as data flow Gen 2. So let me go and create a data flow Gen 2. Now, data flow Gen 2, those familiar with Power BI, correct, can consider data flow Gen 2 as an advanced version of data flow Gen 1, wherein on top of the source transformation remains the same, just that you can add an additional destination at the end. So here, I want to connect get data from the Dataverse. So for that, I do not have an existing connection. I can go and create a connection to my environment. And I'll use my authentication organizational account for authentication. This is creating or establishing a connection. Now I can select the entity that I want to synchronize. I'll select account. It is, and then I'll create this. Now I can add certain transformations within this data. I can delete certain rows. I can add additional columns. So for now, I can either replace the null values or I can remove. I can delete these values or I can rename this column. So for now, let me rename this as column 1. Correct? Similarly, you can do multiple data level transformations as well, which I won't cover in this call. Once that is done, I can add a destination where I want to clone this data because we're physically replicating. So let me clone it to a lake house. Correct? So first I have to create a connection to the lake house. And then I have to select the lakehouse wherein I want to create this synchronization. So it was within which workspace? It was within Dataverse Delhi Tech Community. Within the Dataverse underscore which lakehouse? Okay, Dataverse underscore lakehouse. And let the object name would be account underscore dataflow gen2. And then these are the automatic mappings that it can take, or I can manually add. Do I want to append the data or do I want to replace the data? Correct. So I want to replace the data, meaning overwrite the data. I'll save these settings. And then I'll publish this data flow gen2. Now this is getting published. Post publishing, it would execute. It would synchronize the data from that. So in this scenario, in case if I want to physically load the data from Dataverse into Fabric via some transformations, one needs to use Dataflow Gen2. Now the catch is it consumes a heavy CPU capacity. So only if you want to do certain transformation while movement of data, you use Dataflow Gen2. Else, the best possible way to move the data as is from Dataverse to Microsoft Fabric is to use data pipelines. In case if you want to use data virtualization, use Fabric link and or shortcut. But in that case, the Dataverse storage increases. So these are the four major ways how one can integrate Microsoft Fabric and Microsoft Dataverse. So just to summarize, in case if the data wants to be virtualized in Microsoft Fabric so that we have one source of truth which is within the Dataverse, one can use the benefit. And in case if I want to synchronize multiple entities, one can take the benefits of Fabric link and shortcuts. But in that case, a read-only replica gets created within the Dataverse and the Dataverse storage increases, thereby you having to pay some additional cost for the Dataverse storage. In case if there are only certain entities that you want for analysis, because data fabric link does not support particular entities, one has to physically synchronize the data or copy the data from the Dataverse into the fabric link, into the fabric workspace. That can be done via the data pipeline or the data flow gen2. In case of data pipeline, it's an exact copy. There cannot be any transformation and it consumes a lower CPU capacity. But in case if it is data flow gen2, one can use it for multiple transformations, but it consumes a heavy capacity. Now, since we have additional time, there are two other ways as well how one can synchronize the data. One is via semantic model. What do we mean by semantic model? Under semantic model is basically whenever you publish any Power BI report, a semantic model gets created. Now, there is a property within admin portal called semantic models can export data to one link. I can enable that. And then I can connect Dataverse to via Power BI desktop, publish that report into Power BI service and enable this setting of semantic models can export data to one link. In that way, the data within this semantic model can be exported to the one link, thereby creating a copy of the Dataverse data within the Microsoft Fabric via the semantic model concept. Then there is another way called Synapse link or link to Azure Synapse. Now in that, what we need to do is we need to create an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen2 within Azure, Microsoft Azure. Meaning I need to have some Azure subscription and I need to have an Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. So you all can see that I have multiple resource groups and storage account wherein I have the Azure Synapse created. So I can create the corresponding storage account. I need to have a Azure Synapse Analytic Workspace created in my Azure subscription, have a storage account created in the same region as the Dataverse. Here I can select the particular entities that I want to synchronize and save. What this would do is this would go and physically replicate the data from Dataverse into the Azure Data Lake storage in the form of files, because you need to have a replica created. Now, rather than the data replica being present within the Microsoft Dataverse environment, the data copy replica gets created in the Azure Data Lake storage. But the catch is the data replica that is getting created is not in the Delta Parquet format. It's in the CSV format. So what I need to do is I need to go and create a shortcut to my lake house. You saw, correct? In the shortcut, there was an option to create references to Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. New shortcut. I can create a shortcut to Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. I already have an existing connection to the Dataverse ADLS link. If you all can see, correct? Dataverse underscore Nandan, a replica of it got created. But for now, since it takes time, I'll proceed with selecting under Nandan Dataverse account and action card, since those were the only entities that I selected for the Synapse link. Then now from there, I'm creating a shortcut into my Fabric link. But this shortcut is in the form of CSV file. I cannot create a shortcut under the table section because the table section needs the data to be present in the form of Delta Parquet. Since the Azure Synapse link creates the replica in the form of CSV files, I can create shortcut in the file section and not in the table section. And then I can physically load this into the tables via some automation aspect. So this is the account data that got replicated. And now via some automation code, I can load this data into the tables in case if I want to, else I can directly read this data via this file aspect. So these are the different ways how one can integrate from Dataverse to the Microsoft Fabric. And depending on the use cases with respect to the amount of data that we want to synchronize, how frequently do we want to synchronize? Do we want to duplicate the data or do we want to have one source of truth? One can choose the necessary replication factor. So, any queries on the replication aspects? You all.
A lot. Okay, I have some questions already on the posted there, Nandan. Um, Nandan, when you say read replica, it's way of creating thing, way referential or really physically replicating it. Usually that's a problem, right? The problem with too much of data copy that are happening, and people are forgetting the real source of truth, and the reconciliation problems are happening across organizations. Um, uh, to the question is the when you say shortcuts, can shortcuts being created outside of Fabric also as part of ADLS Gen 2?
No, shortcuts are basically the function. So as I stated, correct? Data lake or the lake house is an advanced version of data lake. Data lake is a generic terminology across all cloud platforms.
I'm
Lakehouse is an advanced version of data lake with shortcut functionality that Microsoft has created within Microsoft
only
Fabric.
with Fabric, only with Fabric, only with, okay. And your lakehouse is only the part portion of Fabric only. Okay. Also, when we say read replica, and we say not to replicate the data. It's just a referential points. Does in a workspace it creates an in-memory load of the data, or is still referencing it to the base location itself?
It's still referencing. That's the concept of shortcut, correct? So though I am being able to though I am able to read the Dataverse data within the Fabric workspace, the data is not present within the Fabric workspace. Fabric workspace is not bearing the storage aspect. It is just when I'm clicking on the tables, the shortcuts, the CPU is being consumed because somewhere I need to execute the query, correct? At that time, the Fabric capacity is being consumed to execute the shortcut, but the data is still present in the Dataverse ecosystem in the read-only replica.
Does it add a more IO if the data would have been physically available in that workspace as compared to being a shortcut? Does it add more physical IOs to it?
So in Fabric, the storage layer is separate than your compute layer, correct? So in case of storage layer being different, the cost would have been bare minimal because Fabric charges costs in GBs storage aspect and it's bare minimal.
I know.
But since data is physically replicated rather than referencing, the normal query would have been much more quicker because it's physically present rather than you being virtually querying. So the CPU consumption would
So
have
the
been
IO,
much more less.
the compute is more. So the compute is more when it's reference data, and when compute is less when it's physically available in that itself. Okay, okay. I got the answers. We are just implementing Fabric, not implementing Fabric, just trying to replicate a lake house in a ADLS Gen 2. Not the with the That's why we are asking whether shortcuts are available, because uh, on a data platform, it's usually that's a problem, correct? Data platform, you need to have a lot of copies of individually in the organization
So
with the
you can
same
read the
slicer.
data from ADLS Gen to into Fabric, but not the other way around. You can
Okay.
mount it here,
Uh,
but not the other way around. So
okay.
Fabric acts as
Okay.
the unified platform, end-to-end platform for an organization to integrate all the data.
Okay, got it, got it. Thanks, Nandan. Was a very informative session. When I knew a lot of things also, but certain things also I learned even after knowing a lot of things. So thanks for enlightening us on a weekend, and joining us. Hopefully, you can join us later in later sessions on our monthly runs as well. Very informative. I hope you have a good rest of the weekend. Hopefully, you don't have to do more sessions, or maybe yes, good for the community. So have a nice weekend, Nandan.
Thank you all. Happy to be part of this initiative. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just stop. Does anyone any has questions? You can post it. Nandan can answer it later on as well. Um, So guys, thanks all for being with us on a lovely weekend of the Global Power BI platform. Um, Hopefully we can we'll still keep on meeting in our monthly runs, on monthly meetups, and I think let's keep learning, and keep growing. Thanks all. Thank you.